The flashing red and blue lights behind him were not just puzzling, they were enraging. Officer Jake Monroe stared in shock through his rearview mirror, watching a golf cart with flashing orange lights weave wildly down the road in chase. The oversized security badge on the driver's shirt shimmered in the afternoon sun, and the smug grin on the man's face sent Jake's blood boiling. This was not a police officer. It was Stanley, a chubby, power-tripping homeowner association enforcer who now had the audacity to pull over a veteran California Highway Patrol officer. Jake sighed, his hand instinctively hovering over his badge and gun. Years of rigorous training had taught him how to stay calm under stress. But this was something else entirely. He pulled to the side of the road, curiosity winning out over annoyance. Stanley shuffled up to Jake's window, clipboard in hand, adjusting his cheap sunglasses like he was about to issue a serious warrant. "Sir," Stanley snapped, voice shrill with self-importance, "do you know why I pulled you over?" Jake stared at him for a long moment, unsure if the man was genuine. "Yeah," Jake said flatly. "Oh, not." Stanley's chest swelled. "This is Pine Grove Estates. A homeowner association policy strictly forbids commercial vehicles being parked or driven within neighborhood limits. And this," he gestured broadly at Jake's official HEP cruiser, "is a commercial vehicle?" Jake let out a short laugh, the ridiculousness washing over him like cold water. "This is a patrol car," Jake said, still struggling to grasp Stanley's confidence. "I am a cop." "You are a resident," Stanley snapped, tapping his clipboard. "Which means you are under homeowner association jurisdiction. The moment you cross those gates," Jake's humor evaporated. "You are joking." "I never joke about homeowner association policy," Stanley said firmly. "If this vehicle is not gone by tomorrow morning, we will start charging you." He scribbled something on his clipboard, then slapped a citation onto Jake's windshield, like he just delivered a verdict. Jake snatched the paper and glanced at it. $75 for violating homeowner association vehicle policy. He exhaled a sharp breath, telling himself it was not worth getting worked up over. Pine Grove Estates had been a quiet place when he moved into care for his aging mother, but now he was starting to see the hidden side of his seemingly peaceful area. The next morning, Jake awoke to find a second violation notice stuffed under his wiper. This one claimed his cruiser's tires were unsightly due to dirt marks. His annoyance grew into full-blown rage when he spotted Stanley a few houses down, clipboard in hand, chatting smugly with Bert Dinkley, the homeowner association president. Bert was a thin, balding man who walked like he had absolute control over everything within a 5-meter radius. Jake knew the type: power-hungry, scheming, and always armed with some obscure rule to get their way. Jake decided enough was enough. Marching down the street in his uniform badge on full display, he approached Stanley and Bert. "You are not putting another ticket on my car," Jake snarled. Bert grinned. "I understand you are a HEP officer, Monroe, but Pine Grove Estates operates under a strict set of guidelines. If you cannot follow them, there will be penalties." "You are intimidating me now," Jake shot back. "Not a warning," Bert said, his voice silky with fake charm. "Just a reminder. If you keep pushing, I will start exploring ways to enforce the rules more strictly." Jake clenched his fists. He was a patient man, but the smugness in Bert's eyes made him want to test just how well homeowner association fines could survive under the weight of a HEP-issued baton. For a while, Jake ignored the homeowner association's nonsense, but Stanley's tactics escalated. Violation notices started arriving daily. Fines for leaving his trash bins out 2 minutes too long, for parking too close to the curb, and even for his garden hose being too exposed. Then came the real shock: a certified letter informing Jake that multiple violations could result in the homeowner association filing a lien on his property. His home, the one he bought to care for his mother, was now at stake. Jake realized this was not just an overzealous homeowner association president on a power trip. It was a deliberate move. He started noticing a trend. Elderly residents were targeted most heavily, fines stacking up until they were forced to sell their homes cheaply. The homes, oddly enough, seemed to end up in the hands of private investors, all close friends of Bert determined to expose what was really happening. Jake dug deeper. He learned that Bert's so-called investors had formed a shell company, quietly flipping properties for profit. Worse still, homeowner association funds seemed to be mysteriously vanishing, and residents who protested found themselves buried in endless violations until they gave up. One night after a late shift, Jake returned home to find his patrol car missing from his driveway. Furious, he called the local impound lot and learned his car had been towed by request of the homeowner association. Jake stormed into the homeowner association office the next morning, finding Bert sipping coffee behind his spotless desk. "You had my patrol car towed?" Jake barked. "That is right," Bert said smugly. "Commercial vehicle." "You have crossed the line," Jake warned. "I know what you are doing. I know about the shell company. I know about the missing homeowner association funds. This will not end well for you." Bert's face darkened and his smile turned cold. "Be careful, Monroe. A man can find himself in a lot of trouble if he does not know when to back off." The warning rang in Jake's ears as he walked home. Something about the way Bert had said it left Jake uneasy. Bert was not just playing homeowner association politics anymore. This was something bigger, something more threatening. The next morning, Jake found a dead rat pinned to his front door. Attached to it was a note: "Do not push it." Jake knew then that this was not just about penalties anymore. Bert's operation was deeper, dirtier, and far more risky than he had imagined. It was not just Jake's home at risk. Now, it was the entire community, maybe even Liv's. He was not backing down. Not now. Not ever. Jake Monroe knew he could not sit back and let the homeowner association continue its harassment. The dead rat on his door was no empty threat. It was a warning that things had moved far beyond trivial fines and neighborhood politics. He spent the next morning carefully recording everything. Every violation notice, every intimidation, every suspicious interaction with Bert Dinkley. He even took photographs of the rat and the note before tossing them in the trash. Years of working as a highway patrol officer had taught him the value of proof, and this felt like the kind of case that was going to need it. Later that afternoon, Jake parked his newly retrieved patrol car prominently in his driveway, positioning it at just the right angle to provoke Bert and Stanley. Predictably, Stanley showed up within 20 minutes. Clipboard in hand, Jake stepped out of his house before Stanley could place yet another violation notice on his windshield. "Do not bother," Jake said, crossing his arms. "I am not moving it." Stanley smiled smugly. "Then expect another ticket." "You know what, Stanley," Jake said, voice calm. "Why do you not tell your boss that if he wants my car gone, he can talk to me himself?" Stanley's grin weakened slightly, but he scribbled on his clipboard anyway before trudging back down the street. Jake waited until Stanley was out of sight before heading to his neighbor Maggie's house. Maggie was in her 60s, a retired cybersecurity consultant with a sharp mind and no love for the homeowner association. Jake knew she had been hit with her fair share of ridiculous fines as well. Maggie let Jake inside and handed him a cup of coffee before he could even ask. She listened quietly as Jake laid out everything: the fake violations, the suspicious fines targeting elderly residents, the shell company buying up properties. When he finished, Maggie leaned back in her chair, eyes focused. "You are right," she said. "Bert has got his hands in something big. I have been suspicious for a while now." Jake was not surprised. Maggie was the kind of person who saw patterns where others did not. Over the years she had quietly collected her own pile of proof against Bert: financial records, property transfers, and even photographs of Bert meeting with questionable-looking individuals who seemed to have no genuine business in Pine Grove Estates. What she did not have, however, was the kind of hard evidence that could take Bert down for good. "We need proof," Jake said, "something irrefutable." Over the next week, Jake and Maggie set up a series of hidden cameras along Jake's property and a few strategic locations around the area. Maggie, with her technical skills, ensured they merged seamlessly into porch lights, bird feeders, and even decorative lawn ornaments. They caught hours of footage, mostly Stanley stomping around writing false fines, but nothing that tied Bert directly to his corrupt operation. That changed one night when Jake returned home late from a patrol shift. He pulled into his driveway and spotted two figures in dark clothing, sneaking around a neighbor's house. The home belonged to an elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Carlson, who had been complaining for weeks about harassment from the homeowner association. Jake shut off his headlights and quietly approached, on foot, staying low and using the shadows to his benefit. As he neared the property, he realized the two figures were Bert and Stanley. Stanley stood by the garage door while Bert peered into the windows, checking to see if anyone was home. Then Bert knelt by the lock and started manipulating it. Jake's breath caught. They were trying to break in. Before Jake could react, Bert slipped a manila envelope under the door and muttered something to Stanley before they both crept away. Jake waited until they were gone, then walked up to the house. He retrieved the envelope and took it home to inspect its contents. Inside were several forms, legal documents demanding immediate homeowner association payment, alongside a letter stating that non-compliance could result in repossession. Attached was a kind offer from a company Jake recognized as one of Bert's suspected shell corporations, offering to buy the Carlsons' home at a fraction of its value. It was a textbook intimidation tactic. Scare the homeowners with threats of legal action, then sweep in with the cheap offer they would feel pressured to take. The next morning, Jake visited the Carlson to warn them. The elderly couple was frightened. Mrs. Carlson showed Jake a series of letters they had received in the past month, each one more menacing than the last. The Carlson had tried to pay their fines, but each payment was followed by a new accusation of some obscure violation. The homeowner association was draining them dry that afternoon. Jake decided to confront Bert directly. He marched into the homeowner association office without knocking and slapped the manila envelope onto Bert's desk. Bert did not flinch. "You are harassing the Carlson," Jake snarled, "and you are using your fake real estate company to cash in on people who cannot fight back." Bert smiled casually. "That is a strong accusation," he said, "but I do not think you have got much evidence." "You and I both know what is going on," Jake shot back. "I have got enough to start an investigation. And when that happens, it is not just you that is going down. It is anyone connected to you." Bert leaned forward, his smug smile turning sharp. "Be careful, Monroe," he said. "I see you interfere too much, and things might get rough." Jake left the office with his blood boiling. He knew Bert was not bluffing. That night, while reviewing footage with Maggie, they caught something alarming. Two men, both unknown, standing outside Jake's home. They lingered for several minutes, staring at his patrol car and murmuring before disappearing into the night. This was not just homeowner association politics anymore. Bert's operation was deeper, filthier, and far more hazardous than Jake had realized. Determined to hit back hard, Jake devised a plan. The next evening, he waited inside his patrol car parked just far enough down the street to keep watch without drawing attention. Sure enough, around midnight, the same two figures returned. This time they moved to his backyard, attempting to tamper with the lock on his shed. Jake emerged quietly, hand on his weapon. "Do not move," Jake commanded, and the two men froze. He ordered them to the ground, cuffed them, and called for backup. The men were not just hired criminals. They were contractors tied directly to one of Bert's companies. Under questioning, one of them confessed everything Bert had been pressuring residents into, leaving their homes, forging violations, and even damaging properties to make them look worthless. If residents refused to sell, Bert used threats, coercion, and harassment to force their hand. Jake knew this was the opportunity he had been waiting for. With Maggie's evidence and the confessions from Bert's hired goons, he had enough to bring the case to the local authorities. But Jake also knew Bert was not the kind of man to go down easily. That night, Jake kept his patrol car parked in the driveway, its lights flashing brightly enough for the entire neighborhood to see. It was not just a warning to Bert, it was a statement. Jake was not backing down. Pine Grove Estates did not belong to Bert Dinkley anymore. It was time for the residents to fight back. The days following the arrest of Bert's hired criminals were tense. Jake Monroe knew that exposing Bert's wrongdoings would not be enough to stop him entirely. Bert was cunning, and men like him had layers of protection, even with evidence. Tying him to threats, forgery, and harassment, Bert had not been arrested yet. The authorities were still building a stronger case. And until then, Bert was free to walk the streets of Pine Grove Estates as smug and untouchable as ever. Jake's patrol car had become a symbol of resistance in the neighborhood. People who once feared speaking out against the homeowner association began to step forward. Him quietly during his morning jogs or grocery runs. They shared their own experiences, stories of intimidation, fines that seemed suspiciously targeted, and property offers that came only after residents had been drained by endless violations. Jake knew the case was growing, but he needed a final nail in the coffin, something undeniable that would leave no loopholes for Bert to escape through. Maggie's research uncovered something even more alarming. Bert's real estate scam was not just about flipping homes. The shell company tied to him had been funneling money into other suspicious accounts. Large sums were being transferred to unknown offshore accounts, and there was evidence of potential ties to organized crime. Bert was not just scamming homeowners, he was part of something far more sinister. Determined to get a closer look, Jake decided to bait Bert into making a mistake. Using a contact within the HEP, Jake recruited 2 off-duty officers to pose as potential property investors. With Maggie's help, they created a convincing backstory. Wealthy developers interested in distressed properties like those Bert had been targeting. The goal was simple: catch Bert discussing his operation openly. The staged meeting took place in a local diner just outside the community. Bert arrived confidently, shaking hands with the fake investors and slipping into his role as the friendly businessman with ease. Jake watched from a nearby seat, pretending to read a newspaper. The conversation began innocently enough. Discussions about property values, neighborhood improvements, and investment potential. But soon Bert's arrogance began to surface. "You would be surprised what you can accomplish with a little influence," Bert said smugly, stirring his coffee. "Few finds here and there, and suddenly, people are desperate to sell. The trick is pressure them long enough, and they will fold." One of the officers posing as an investor leaned in. "And the homeowner association does not push back on this?" Bert laughed. "I run the homeowner association. I decide what is a violation. Trust me, there is always a way to make people pay. Once they are desperate enough, they will sell for nothing." The arrogance in Bert's voice made Jake's fists clench. Under the table, Bert was so confident in his control over Pine Grove Estates that he did not even bother to keep his methods a secret. After recording enough incriminating remarks to confirm Bert's role in the scam, Jake stepped outside to call his HEP captain and alert the local authorities. But before Jake could make the call, a sleek black SUV pulled into the diner's parking lot. Jake recognized one of the men inside, a stocky figure he had seen in Maggie's surveillance footage. This was not one of Bert's henchmen. This was someone higher up the chain. The man entered the diner, exchanged a brief nod with Bert, then slipped an envelope into his hand before leaving. Just as quickly, Jake knew that envelope was not filled with paperwork. It was cash. Bert was not just feeding off homeowner association corruption. He was washing money for organized criminals. That envelope was payment for whatever role Bert had played in their larger operation. The situation had grown far more threatening than Jake expected. Bert's arrogance had led him to make a blunder, but Jake knew cornering a man like that was risky. If Bert realized he was being watched by law enforcement, he might lash out. Jake decided they had to act immediately. That night, Jake and Maggie reviewed all the evidence footage from the fake investor meeting surveillance of Bert's secret exchanges and financial records showing suspicious transfers connected to organized crime. Jake presented the case to his HEP captain the next morning, who in turn reached out to the district attorney. A raid was approved, but they needed Jake's help to execute it. The plan was to catch Bert red-handed during one of his payoff meetings. Surveillance indicated another meeting was scheduled for the following Friday night, this time at the homeowner association office itself. The location was risky. Bert knew the homeowner association office inside and out, and if things went sideways, there were too many blind spots for comfort. Jake insisted on being involved directly, arguing that no one knew Pine Grove Estates better than he did the night of the operation. Jake positioned himself just down the road from the homeowner association office. His HEP team remained hidden in unmarked vehicles nearby. Just after 10, Bert's black SUV rolled in. Jake recognized the driver, the same man from the diner. Moments later, Bert stepped outside with Stanley trailing behind him like a faithful dog. Jake knew Stanley was mostly useless, a coward hiding behind Bert's bravado. But tonight, there was no room for errors. The SUV driver handed Bert another envelope, and Jake gave the signal. Officers surrounded the vehicle, weapons drawn. Bert's face shifted from confusion to panic as he realized what was happening. Stanley bolted for the back door of the homeowner association office. "Can do," Jake said calmly. "Sound familiar?" Inside Bert's SUV, officers found stacks of cash, fake violation notices pre-written with Pine Grove Estates residents' addresses, and detailed ledgers tracking money transfers to various offshore accounts. The evidence was overpowering. Bert was not just going to jail, he was going away for a long time. Over the following weeks, the residents of Pine Grove Estates began to reclaim their neighborhood without Bert pulling the strings. The homeowner association board members who had once feared him came forward with additional evidence, exposing even more layers of corruption. Fines were dismissed, wrongful foreclosures were reversed, and Bert's tangled web of deception began to collapse. For the first time in months, Pine Grove Estates felt like a community again. Neighbors began to trust one another, and families who had once kept to themselves now gathered in the park or greeted from their porches. The homeowner association board elected a new president, a compassionate retired teacher named M. Parker, who promised to restore justice and reason to the neighborhood. One evening, as Jake sat on his porch drinking a cold beer, Maggie joined him. They watched kids playing in the street, their laughter bouncing off the houses. "You really shook things up around here," Maggie said. Jake grinned. "Did not plan on becoming the neighborhood hero." "Well," Maggie said, "next time Stanley tries to penalize you for your grass being half an inch too tall, I expect you to handle it with a little less chaos." Jake laughed harder than he had in weeks. No guarantees. The peace in Pine Grove Estates did not last long. Just when the neighborhood seemed to be returning to normal, rumors started circulating that Bert Dinkley had made bail. Jake Monroe was not surprised. Bert had money, connections, and a knack for slipping out of tight situations. Despite the mountain of evidence against him, Bert had secured his release. Awaiting trial, the residents of Pine Grove Estates were uneasy. Even though Bert could not legally return to the community, people still whispered about what he might try to do next. Jake kept a sharp eye on his surroundings. He knew Bert was the type to lash out when cornered, and after years in law enforcement, Jake had learned that desperate men made reckless decisions. Maggie agreed. She was convinced Bert still had people working for him, homeowner association supporters, or thugs from his criminal dealings. Jake believed her, and when he spotted Stanley lurking near his property one evening, his suspicions only grew stronger. Stanley looked different. He was not the smug, clipboard-wielding menace anymore. He seemed nervous, jittery, and paranoid. Jake approached him on the sidewalk. "What are you doing here, Stanley?" Jake asked, his voice stern. Stanley flinched like he had been caught in a crime. "I was just walking," he mumbled. Jake narrowed his eyes. "You are not supposed to be near my property, or anyone's, for that matter." Stanley swallowed hard, then blurted, "He is coming back." Jake tensed. "Who is coming back?" "Bert," Stanley whispered. "He is not done yet. He says he is taking everything back." Jake could tell Stanley was terrified. Whatever Bert had told him had shaken him to the core. Stanley was no mastermind, just a follower. But Jake knew a warning when he heard one. He pressed Stanley for more details, but Stanley refused to say anything else and hurried away down the street. That night, Jake could not sleep. He sat on his porch watching the neighborhood. Like a guard, the air felt heavy, like a storm was brewing. Around midnight, Jake noticed something. Van, slowly circling the block. It passed his house twice, each time halting near his driveway. Jake grabbed his badge and weapon, slipping quietly into the darkness. When the van circled back a third time, Jake moved swiftly, stepping into the street and holding up his identification. Out of the vehicle, Jake called out. The van's engine roared and the driver sped down the road. Jake sprinted to his patrol car and gave pursuit. The van raced through Pine Grove's winding streets, barely missing parked cars and skidding around corners. Jake kept his siren off, hoping to stay unnoticed until the van reached the neighborhood's exit as expected. The van turned toward the main gate, but when it reached the exit, another car blocked the path. Maggie's car. She had been listening to Jake's police radio and acted fast. With nowhere to go, the van's driver jumped out and ran toward the wooded area behind the community. Jake was quicker. He caught up, tackled the man, and pinned him to the ground. The man was not some hired criminal. It was one of Bert's former homeowner association board members, a guy named Greg Turner, who had mysteriously avoided trouble during Bert's initial capture. Jake hauled Greg to his patrol car and called for backup. While waiting, Jake searched Greg's van and found something disturbing: a stack of papers with residents' names, addresses, and coded labels. Some homes had red marks beside them. Jake's house was one of them. So was Maggie's. Greg refused to talk, but it was not hard to figure out what was happening. Bert was not just planning to intimidate residents. He was preparing to strike back, in a way that could leave real harm. Jake suspected Bert planned to vandalize targeted homes, or even stage break-ins to terrorize the residents who had turned against him. The following day, Jake met with the district attorney. The coded papers, combined with Greg's ties to Bert, gave authorities enough to issue a search warrant for Bert's residence. What they found was worse than Jake had imagined. In Bert's rented storage unit were boxes of falsified property documents, phony violation notices, and a pile of fake legal letters designed to trick homeowners into surrendering their ownership. Even more shocking were several blueprints of Pine Grove estates with certain homes marked for break-ins Bert had been methodically orchestrating to scare the neighborhood back under his control. He was not just trying to recover his old scams. He wanted vengeance. Jake knew it was only a matter of time before Bert tried something even more threatening. 2 nights later, that time came. Just past midnight, Jake's phone rang. It was Maggie. Her voice panicked. "There is someone at the homeowner association office," she whispered. "I think it is Bert." Jake bolted out of bed and raced to the office. The parking lot was empty except for a familiar car, Bert's. Jake approached carefully, his hand hovering near his firearm. He moved to one of the windows and saw Bert inside, pacing angrily and waving a weapon. Stanley sat, slumped in a chair, his face pale and his wrists bound with plastic ties. Jake knew better than to go in alone. He stepped back and called for backup. As he waited, he kept his eyes locked on the window. Bert was shouting now, gesturing wildly at Stanley, who nodded fearfully in response. Then Jake saw something worse. A canister of gasoline sitting on the desk beside Bert. The air smelled faintly of fuel. Bert was not planning to run. He was planning to destroy everything. The homeowner association office, the records, and Stanley with it. Jake could not wait for backup. He moved to the back entrance, unlocked it quietly with the key Maggie had given him, and slipped inside. Bert's voice grew louder as he ranted at Stanley. "You were supposed to help me," Bert snapped. "You let them win." "I did not," Stanley begged. "I swear I did not." Bert raised the gas can, pouring liquid across the floor. The stench grew stronger, stinging Jake's nose as he crept closer. "Put the can down, Bert," Jake called out firmly. Bert spun, startled. His eyes widened when he saw Jake, then twisted with rage. "You," Bert hissed. "You did this. You are not going to fix it like this," Jake said evenly. "Whatever you think you are doing, it is not worth it." Bert's fingers tightened around his igniter. "You think I will not do it?" he scoffed. "I know you are frightened," Jake said, "but this does not end well for you. Put the flame down. Walk away. It is over." For a moment, Jake was not sure Bert would listen, but then the sound of sirens filled The air in Bert's face collapsed. He let the device fall from his hand and dropped to his knees. By the time backup arrived, Bert was cuffed and Stanley had been freed. The police collected what little evidence remained in the office. Bert's final, desperate attempt to regain control. The neighborhood was safe once more. In the days that followed, Pine Grove Estates finally felt like home again. The community gathered to celebrate, hosting a block party in the park. Neighbors laughed and shared stories, no longer afraid to speak their minds. Mrs. Parker, the new Home Owner Association president, promised fairness and balanced decisions, finally putting the community's fears to rest. Jake stood with Maggie at the party, sipping a cold drink and watching the families play. Maggie smirked at him. "You know," she said, "you should run for Home Owner Association president." Jake nearly spit out his drink. "No way. I have had enough Home Owner Association nonsense for a lifetime."